The blow landed before I had time to register what was happening. My mother's palm caught me across the belly, my 6 months pregnant belly, with enough force that I stumbled backward into the dining room's sideboard, sending the crystal candlesticks rattling. For a full second, the only sound in my parents' Oakville dining room was the sharp crack of that impact and the distant hum of the dishwasher in the kitchen. Then my husband was there, standing between us, his hand cupping the back of my head the way a person cradles something that almost broke. "The first grandchild in this family belongs to your sister," my mother said. Her voice was perfectly calm. She straightened the cuffs of her blazer as if she had simply reached across the table for the salt. "End this pregnancy, or end your relationship with this family. Those are your only choices." My sister stood at the edge of the dining room, one shoulder propped against the doorframe, inspecting her manicure. She hadn't flinched. She had been expecting this. "Don't look so shocked," my sister said, her eyes still on her nails. "You're a data entry clerk at some government office. What do you actually have to offer a child?" She picked an invisible piece of lint from her cashmere sleeve. "Trevor's company has real investors now. Our baby will have a real future. Yours would just be a burden." My brother-in-law sat at the head of my parents' table with a crystal glass of Malbec and the particular expression of a man who has decided that other people's suffering is not his problem. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. Behind my ribs, something familiar and cold clicked into place, not panic, not grief. Protocol. The surgical clarity I had learned from 6 years of following paper trails through shell companies and offshore transfers. Every face in that room became a data point. Every word they had just spoken became evidence. And the woman they believed was a data entry clerk was in fact the specific person in Canada who held the authority to determine whether my brother-in-law's government contract application lived or died. Before I tell you what was in the file I had been building for 4 months, please give this video a like and drop your location and local time in the comments. Stick around, because the secrets about to surface in this story will change everything you think you know about who actually had the power in this family. My sister had been performing the role of heartbroken, infertile would-be mother for 3 years. She did it beautifully. The tearful phone calls to our parents, the grainy images that were never actually hers, the IVF updates that stretched across seasons, each one costing my parents somewhere in the neighborhood of $160,000 total, money they had withdrawn from their RRSP savings over the course of 30 years. My father had taught high school history in Burlington for 3 decades to build that nest egg. My sister spent it on a performance. I had started noticing the inconsistencies 8 months earlier. A clinic name that didn't match the address on her paperwork. Hormone medication bottles with labels that had been reprinted. A receptionist at an Oakville fertility clinic who, when I mentioned my sister's name while scheduling my own OB appointment, looked at me with polite confusion and said she had no record of that patient. I didn't say anything to my parents then. I opened a file folder instead. My husband was the one who first noticed something off about my brother-in-law's company. Trevor's technology consulting firm had been soliciting government contracts for 2 years. The website looked professional. The brochures were glossy. But the registered address was a mail drop in Mississauga. The staff were contractors on 30-day agreements, and the only deliverable Trevor had ever actually produced for a client was a spreadsheet that a first-year university student could have built in an afternoon. 4 months ago, my brother-in-law submitted a bid to Public Services and Procurement Canada for a $2.8 million federal digitization contract. He had no idea the application would land on my desk. The afternoon after my mother hit me, my husband drove me to Oakville General and sat beside me for 2 hours while a technician confirmed the baby was unharmed. He didn't say much. He didn't need to. On the drive home, my phone began vibrating with the sustained intensity of a family group chat that had caught fire. My aunt forwarded me a video. My sister, sitting in the passenger seat of her husband's Audi, mascara drawn down her cheeks in careful, photogenic lines, telling her 40,000 Instagram followers that her violent, jealous sister had attacked her at a family gathering because she could not bear to see anyone else have what she couldn't. She described injuries that had never happened. She described words I had never said. She wept at precisely calibrated intervals. The comments were immediate. My uncle typed in all capitals. My cousin called me a disgrace to the family. My aunt, the very one who had forwarded me the video, left a public comment calling me unstable. These were people who had attended my wedding. People who had never once, in 37 years, asked for my side of anything before deciding what it was. My father called that evening. His voicemail informed me that he had already contacted my supervisors at the government office. The phrase of a man who genuinely doesn't know what his daughter does for a living. He told me he had connections in Ottawa. He told me he would make sure I lost my position before the month was out. I played the message twice. Then I opened my encrypted work laptop and began drafting a formal referral to the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit. The demand letter arrived by courier the following Thursday. My brother-in-law's lawyer, operating from a strip mall office on Dundas Street, had drafted a document requiring $80,000 in certified funds within 15 business days. If I didn't comply, my sister would release additional footage to national media outlets and file a formal complaint with my federal employer. They believed I was a data entry clerk living paycheck to paycheck on a government typist's salary. What my family knew about my career could be summarized in one sentence. I worked in Ottawa, came home to Toronto on weekends, and occasionally mentioned long meetings and procurement processes in the vague way of someone who finds their own work too technical to explain at a dinner table. What they chose to believe from that was a cubicle and a keyboard. What I actually did was chair the review committee for federal procurement bids over $1 million. I was the Senior Compliance Officer for Public Services and Procurement Canada. Every significant government contract application passed through a vetting process I had designed and oversaw. I had the authority to flag, pause, reject, or refer for criminal investigation any bid that showed evidence of fraud, misrepresentation, or financial misconduct. Trevor's application had shown all three within the first 40 pages. The RCMP officer I had been working with, Senior Constable Agatha Voss from the Financial Crimes Unit, who had been running surveillance on my brother-in-law's company for 11 weeks under my referral, delivered her preliminary case file to my secure inbox the same week the demand letter arrived. The summary ran to 63 pages. The headline finding: my brother-in-law had borrowed $320,000 from my father's RRSP-backed investment accounts under the pretense of matching capital for a government venture. He had transferred every dollar within 72 hours to an offshore gaming platform registered in the Cayman Islands, where it was lost across a series of online betting accounts. My father's retirement savings, 30 years of a teacher's salary, gone in 3 days at a virtual table. I read that file 3 times. I didn't feel shock. I felt the cold, absolute certainty of someone who has just confirmed what they already knew about people they had already stopped being surprised by. The worst thing came 4 weeks after that. My husband and I drove to Women's College Hospital on a Tuesday morning for my 22-week anatomy scan. The appointment I had been looking forward to for months. The one where we would see our baby's face for the first time. The intake nurse at the registration desk told me my appointment had been canceled. She showed me the system log. The cancellation had come through a phone call 2 days earlier. The caller had given my full name, my provincial health card number, and my date of birth. The caller had stated, in a cooperative and unhurried voice, that I was ending the pregnancy and would no longer require prenatal care at this facility. I knew before the nurse finished the sentence. Those details, my health card number, my date of birth, are not things that get memorized by accident. They are things a mother collects over 37 years. They sit in a mental file alongside your first lost tooth and every small detail that was always meant to be kept safe. She had used that information to impersonate me to a hospital. She had reached through a phone line and told a medical facility that my baby's life didn't warrant further care. Under Section 403 of the Criminal Code of Canada, fraudulently impersonating another person to obtain or deny a service carries a maximum sentence of 10 years. I sat down in the plastic chair beside the registration desk. For the first time in my adult life, the armor simply stopped holding, not a collapse. Something quieter and more total than that. The sound that came out of my chest was not a sob. It was the sound of a woman who had waited her entire life for one reasonable act from her own mother and had just received the final, unambiguous confirmation that it was never coming. My husband was on his knees in front of me within seconds. His arms came around me. I pressed my face into the collar of his jacket and felt his jaw lock and his shoulders go rigid with the kind of rage that belongs to someone who would walk through fire to protect his family and knows exactly who lit the match. I counted. Exactly 2. When I lifted my face and wiped my cheeks against my sleeve and stood up, the woman who had sat down in that chair was gone. What replaced her had nothing left to spend on mercy. If you believe what my mother did that day crossed every possible line a person can cross, type the word justice in the comments right now. And please subscribe and turn on notifications, because what happened next, I am going to take you inside the federal building where I tore this family's fraudulent empire apart, floor by floor. You will not want to miss it. The recording of the cancellation call was archived in the hospital's phone system. The supervising administrator retrieved it within the hour. My mother's voice, my name, my health card number, my date of birth, delivered in a tone so calm and cooperative that the scheduling clerk had had no reason to question a word of it. I forwarded the audio file to Senior Constable Voss with a single line, add it to the file. Then I made the call I had been building toward for 4 months. Trevor's contract application had been sitting in formal pause status since week 2 of the review. He didn't know about the hold. He believed the bid was under normal processing. He had even sent a mutual acquaintance to ask me casually, over Christmas dinner, whether things were moving along on the procurement side. I had smiled and said I couldn't discuss active files. The week after the hospital recording, the RCMP served formal investigative warrants on my brother-in-law's company, his personal bank accounts, and 3 associated shell entities registered in Nova Scotia. My office formally denied the contract application the same afternoon. 2 days later, my father called again. Trevor needs that contract, he said. His voice had a new quality, a thinness, like paper that had been wet and dried. We've put significant capital in. This would stabilize everything. I asked him what kind of capital. He said it was a personal investment, a loan from his savings. I'll look into it, I told him. I'll be in Ottawa Thursday. We could have coffee. Don't bother, he said, hardening back into himself. I've already contacted your department. I told them, you're abusing your government position to run a personal vendetta against your own family. You'll be hearing from the ethics commissioner. I waited until the line had been quiet for 3 full seconds. I'll see you Thursday, I said, and ended the call. My parents arrived at the PSPC building on Spark Street on a Thursday morning wearing the expressions of people walking into a negotiation they believe they've already won. My mother in a wool coat she considered appropriate for government offices. My father with a leather portfolio folder under his arm. My brother-in-law in a suit that was slightly too shiny, carrying a second portfolio stuffed with the same fabricated financial projections he had filed with the bid. My administrative assistant, a woman named Tamara who had spent 19 years in federal procurement and could identify a fraudulent application in the time it took to pour a cup of coffee, met them at the lobby desk. She was warm, she was professional. She offered them coffee from the good machine on the 3rd floor, handed them visitor lanyards, and walked them through security with the easy competence of someone who has escorted far more dangerous people through these same doors and never broken a smile doing it. I watched them cross the atrium on the security monitors, 4 camera feeds. My father stopped in front of the framed portraits of former ministers along the main corridor. He straightened his tie. He absorbed the weight of the building the way a man absorbs borrowed importance. The corridor microphone, which my team monitored routinely during sensitive intake appointments, caught what he said to my brother-in-law. This is the caliber of people we're dealing with. Real federal oversight, not some small-town office. He was describing my building. I stood up, I straightened my blazer, I picked up the 70-page investigative file and walked out of my office. My footsteps crossed the hallway in a rhythm I kept deliberate and unhurried. When I opened the boardroom door, all 3 of them were seated at the long mahogany table, coffee cups in front of them. Mid-conversation, they looked up. The conversation stopped. My mother's hand froze around her coffee cup. My father's face moved through confusion, recognition, and then a color I had never seen on him, something between shame and fury that hadn't yet decided which one to become. My brother-in-law's portfolio slid off his lap and hit the floor. I walked past all 3 of them without speaking, crossed to the chair at the head of the table, and sat down in it the way a person sits in a chair they have occupied for a decade. Because I had. I set the file on the table. I placed my government identification card beside it, face up, logo visible, title readable from every seat in the room. Senior Compliance Officer, Public Services and Procurement Canada. My brother-in-law made a sound that wasn't quite a word. I turned on the projector. Slide 1. Trevor submitted bid specifications, traced line by line to publicly available government publications, and presented as proprietary methodology. Slide 2. Corporate financial statements showing 3 separate instances of altered revenue figures detectable without forensic software. Slide 3. Wire transfer records. $320,000 from my father's registered investment accounts, moved through my brother-in-law's shell company, forwarded within 72 hours to a gaming platform in the Cayman Islands. Account numbers, transaction timestamps, withdrawal confirmations, every critical line highlighted. I read each slide aloud, not for their benefit, for the recording. On behalf of Public Services and Procurement Canada, I said, the bid submitted by this applicant is formally denied on the grounds of fraudulent misrepresentation, financial non-disclosure, and ongoing criminal investigation by the RCMP Financial Crimes Unit. The boardroom door opened. Senior Constable Voss entered with 2 members of her unit and a stack of federal seizure orders. The sound of that door handle clicking was the most satisfying sound I had heard in months. My mother looked at me. Her face was running the calculation in real time, looking for exits that didn't exist. Sweetheart, she said. The words sat in the air between us like something from a foreign language. You have authority here. Talk to someone. You can make this go quiet. I looked at her for a long moment. Senior Constable, I said, please proceed. My sister did not find out what had happened at the PSPC building until that evening. By then, my brother-in-law had been served with warrants. My parents had been driven home in silence, my father still holding the folder of fabricated financials that no one would ever look at again. My sister's response was exactly what I had expected. She declared an emergency and called it a celebration. She booked the ballroom at the Fairmont Château Laurier for what she told our extended family and Trevor's remaining investors was a baby milestone dinner. The invitations went out that same night. Black tie, 75 guests. My parents had liquidated the last of their liquid assets for the booking deposit. A dinner party as a lifeline, dressed in orchids and candlelight. My mother sent me a text, "You are not welcome. Danielle is the heart of this family. She always has been." I dressed in a blazer and tailored trousers and called my husband. We walked into the Château Laurier ballroom at 7:45. The chandelier light was warm and golden. The string quartet was playing Vivaldi in the corner. 75 guests turned to look at us, and the conversations died in a slow wave, one cluster at a time, like candles being blown out across the room. My sister saw us from the far end of the ballroom and went very still. My brother-in-law, who had come directly from a meeting with his legal counsel, looked at me with the expression of a man calculating odds that have already run out. My father moved toward the event security staff, gesturing in our direction. My husband reached into his jacket pocket and produced his identification alongside a sealed judicial authorization. The security team read it carefully. They looked at each other. They stepped back. The exit sealed. RCMP officers in plainclothes materialized at every door. The string quartet stopped mid-note. I crossed the room to the small elevated platform at the front. I took the microphone the way I take any tool that is useful to me, without ceremony, without announcement, as though the room had been waiting in exactly this configuration for considerably longer than anyone here realized. The ballroom's projection screen came to life. The footage was from a medical supply store on St. Clair Avenue in Toronto, time-stamped 14 months ago. My sister browsing a display rack of prosthetic pregnancy forms, selecting one, carrying it to a fitting room, emerging with it fitted under her blouse, turning sideways in the mirror to check the profile, adjusting the straps, smiling at her reflection, paying at the register with a Visa card. The sound that moved through the ballroom was not a gasp. It was the held breath of 75 people watching a story they had been told for years collapse in real time. My sister turned and ran. She made it 4 steps before her heel caught the edge of a chair. She went down hard on the ballroom floor, and the seam of her dress tore from hip to knee. The prosthetic belly freed itself from the torn fabric and slid 3 feet across the polished marble, coming to rest in the warm amber glow of the chandeliers. The room went completely silent. My brother-in-law did not go to her. He turned for the kitchen entrance instead. 2 RCMP officers closed the distance in seconds. He made it to the service hallway. The charges, when filed, would include fraud over $5,000, money laundering, making a false statement to obtain a government contract, and misappropriation of private investment funds. Senior Constable Voss told me the following morning that the stack of counts was, even by financial crimes unit standards, impressive. My father stood in the center of the Château Laurier ballroom while around him, guests set down champagne flutes and reached for their coats and avoided each other's eyes. The event photographer stood near the dessert table with his camera at his side, no longer photographing anything. My father looked at the marble floor where the prosthetic belly still lay. Then he looked at me. Something in him simply gave way. Not a feint, a man's body surrendering the kind of strength that was always made of pride rather than anything real. He sank to his knees on the Château Laurier floor and looked up at me with an expression I had never once seen on his face in 37 years. "Sweetheart," he said. His voice was not the voice that had left me threatening voicemails. It was something smaller, something I might once have recognized as my father. "Please. The house, we have nothing left. You have influence. You could talk to someone. You could make this manageable." I looked at the man who had raised me, who had told me I wasn't good enough to sit at a table I had been running for over a decade, who had called my work insignificant from the living room of a house his son-in-law had quietly gambled away. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I took my husband's arm, and we walked out of the Château Laurier into the October night. Behind us, the chandelier light spilled through the tall windows onto the wet sidewalk along Wellington Street, and the canal was dark and still, and the whole city was doing whatever a city does on an ordinary Tuesday night when someone else's world is ending. 6 months later, the final reports crossed my desk. My brother-in-law received a federal sentence for fraud over $5,000, money laundering, and misrepresentation in procurement of government funds. His name appeared in the Globe and Mail's court records. His firm was dissolved by court order and added to the federal contractor ineligibility list. My sister filed for personal bankruptcy within 60 days of his arrest. Her social media accounts disappeared overnight. The IVF journey, the sponsored posts, the 40,000 followers who had sent prayers and donation links, gone in an afternoon. She moved into a one-bedroom apartment in a part of the city she used to drive through with her car doors locked. My parents lost the Oakville house. The mortgage my brother-in-law had leveraged against it without their complete understanding was called in the moment his assets were seized. The cars went with it. The country club membership was quietly canceled by the club's own board, who had their own reasons for not wanting Trevor's name associated with their roster any longer. I was sitting in our living room in Toronto on a Thursday morning in April, my daughter asleep against my chest. She was 4 months old. Her fingers had wrapped around my thumb with a grip that already felt like stubbornness, which I chose to believe she had inherited from me. My phone lit up on the coffee table, a voicemail notification, my mother's number. I pressed play. Her voice filled the quiet room, fractured and unrecognizable from the voice that had straightened its blazer cuffs in a government lobby and believed itself untouchable. She was sorry. She had been wrong. They had nothing left now. She would do anything. She just wanted to know her granddaughter. I listened to every second of it. I looked down at my daughter, the small furrow between her brows, when she was deep in a dream, the way her eyelashes lay against her cheeks, like she had been painted there with the finest possible brush. Then I looked back at the phone. I pressed delete. The voicemail disappeared. My daughter sighed in her sleep. Outside the window, a streetcar ran along Queen Street, and somewhere down the block a neighbor was cutting their lawn for the first time since the snow melted, and the whole city was going about its ordinary Thursday morning as if nothing extraordinary had happened at all. For us, it hadn't, not anymore. This was simply our life now, the one I had spent a year building a case file to protect, the one no one in that family had been able to take from me, the one that belonged, entirely and without qualification, to no one but us. If you stayed until the end and watched this family get exactly what they had earned, please give this video a thumbs up and share it with someone who believes in justice. Subscribe and turn on notifications. I'll be back with another story soon, and I promise you will not want to miss it.